The gentleman and the lady, and there's one at the back as well.
What could the U.S. do to help improve things in places like Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, where there's so much corruption? It seems like anything that could be done just gets wiped out.
So I write a little bit about that in my book, because I got to work in Honduras. And we wanted to work, my office wanted to work in Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala at the same time, and treat the three countries as North Central America, because we thought that there were related problems. But we had two ambassadors, one embassy and one ambassador, that were reluctant, so that earlier conversation we had. But the ambassador in Honduras, Lisa Kubisky, was like, help, please help. So when we got down there, we saw a bunch of stuff, and I saw some things in El Salvador, so I'll just mention the two. First off, we didn't think that the domestic political scene in Honduras was dealing with homicide, which was the highest rate in the world other than a war zone, as if it was the central political issue of the time. So we wanted to make sure that we focused the political class and anybody around that was influential in the political class on that issue. And it turned out, in that country, in Honduras, there was a woman who had created a coalition of about 180 civil society organizations after her son. She was the rector of one of the major university right there in the capital. Her son had been taken by the police and disappeared, and showed up with a friend dead in a car 3 days later. And it was clear the police had done it. And she had a position in the community where she had a soapbox. She was going to be heard, and she could pursue it, and she wouldn't be attacked or killed herself as a result of doing it. So she pulled together this coalition. And we thought, if that coalition if this is where we could be catalytic, we could show them, that group of people, how to be much more effective than they had started out by being. They weren't using social media very well. They were using almost no television. They were not requiring meetings with the government officials. They needed to. There were laws that had just been passed to actually help with the prosecution of homicides. And they were funded by a tax on the business community, and the business community actually supported the tax. But we could feel the elephant, and we knew that the likelihood that they'd collect the tax properly, that they would appropriate it well, or that they would manage it particularly well, were all in doubt. So we helped them with that as well. We brought down a prosecutor from Seattle because the prosecution brought a police a person from Dallas in to work with those people, because we knew it wasn't like every prosecutor in Honduras was incompetent, or every policeman couldn't close a case. We knew that if they had a little bit of help, there was a will. And sure enough, then we also found, again through this civil society group, that there was a group in the toughest part of Tegucigalpa that instead of getting a 0 prosecution rate on homicides, was getting an 85% successful prosecution rate. What were they doing? Could you make it grow? Could you apply it at a national level? So this kind of stuff is really practical. I mean, you can see, was there anything there that sounded exotic to you? Did it all sound like it's doable? It's within reach. Okay, that's the kind of program I like. And that's why I describe these things in the book, because I knew the United States in that case was being helpful. I met with the guy who's the president now. He's having trouble with the Constitution. You know, how he personally interprets the Constitution. And when we had that meeting with him, I thought, he was the Senate leader at that point, unicameral system in Honduras. And I thought, this guy reminds me of Lyndon Johnson. Now, I didn't know Lyndon Johnson, but I've listened to the radio tapes on C-SPAN and whatnot, and he was larger than life. And he was a creature of the Senate, which I thought this president was as well. And so he wasn't the president, he was a presidential candidate at that time. But I thought he would really benefit by learning a little bit about Lyndon Johnson, both what made him great and what made him not so great. And so I said to him, you know, have you ever heard any of these tapes? Have you ever, that's something another thing that I think we could do is sometimes, a lot of these guys need personal trainers. I mean, it's not easy being a president. And so, you know, do we have any personal trainers here? Yeah. Do they have to be paid political consultants that are muddying our own system? Not necessarily. But although they're the ones who are most likely to get there because they can make money off of this thing. So anyway, I believe there are things we can do. The other one I wanted to mention to you, which is much more controversial and I did not succeed at. When I got to El Salvador, there was a truce between the two biggest gangs. And the truce had been brokered by a very charismatic Monsignor in the Catholic Church. And by the former Minister of Defense, who was known as a mano duro, a hard hand. He was a guy who wanted to enforce the rule of law. But when he got to be the Minister of the Interior, he realized he had a war going on in his country, and the only way wars often end is to negotiate between the parties. And the parties that were at war were two gangs who had their roots in the United States. So and by the way, they had 10,000 of these gang members and all of the leadership in prison. 10,000. And of course, they were still kind of running their operation from prison. That's not that new, even in less corrupt societies. So he actually came up with this truce, the priest did, and he started it by he tried to invite just the core of the leaders to a high-level dinner, and they both said, no way, I'm not going to any dinner without at least 10 of my colleagues, because otherwise they go back and they get killed. I mean, trust is not that big. And so he got them together in a room, and he got pollo campero or something like that, the favorite chicken of everybody in El Salvador. They sat in separate parts of the room. They ate their pollo campero. I mean, these are prisoners, so even though they violate the rules all the time, they don't necessarily get this kind of a night. He had cigars for them at the end. There were almost no talks, and that began a process that led to a truce. Now, they were having 15 homicides a day and dropped down to 4 or 5 a day. So immediate change in the environment. And when I got there, I thought, this is a high risk play. And it's been a high risk play because that former Mano Duro guy, I think, is being prosecuted now by his political successors. But I thought if the United States, instead of just going with our standard route, which was DEA, FBI, U.S. military, standard diplomacy, you know, if we stepped outside, we could actually improve the quality of this thing. Because for me, having worked with the former soldiers in Haiti who were reviled, I learned one major lesson, which was we could work with them, we could stabilize the country, we could make them a part of the promising future, but not if we looked like we ever made them a privileged class. If they looked like they were getting better than the average citizen, then we were dead. And the same thing with the gangs. You couldn't elevate them, but you had to do something with them. And I thought, okay, why not? Because the other thing isn't working. I mean, we haven't really stopped the drug flow. We may have moved it from El Salvador to Honduras or from Colombia to somewhere else. But now that gets to another issue, but about our own responsibility. But anyway, so I thought that was an opportunity that was missed. But it was too high risk, even though I thought it was intriguing. And intriguing doesn't mean you need to grab it eventually. You may decide, bad deal. That's the venture capital thing. I'm fascinated, but I'm not going to put my money into it. You could always make that choice still. But anyway, these are the kinds of things that are out there, and they're in play, and they could make a difference. And I hope I answered your question.